I shall go for slideshow. Come on. From the beginning. Okay, everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes,
Thank
that's
you.
fine.
Yes.
Lovely. Okay. This is the slides. This is quite short notice, so the slides are pretty much what I did for History Links, and the title says Archaeology of Dalnamain, because to a certain extent the history of Dalnamain was done by somebody else at for the conference, which of course went digital and is now available through the History Links website. So, right, Dalnamain, a deserted settlement, and if you think of the A9, here we go, that's the A9, hopefully everybody can see my cursor, going north, the mound, and then you turn up the very narrow little road up to Loch Fleet, and Dalnamain is here. And hopefully everybody else can see Dalnamain on the right. Why did we go to Dalnamain? The idea was that we would look at a Sutherland longhouse in detail. And because this was a publicly funded project and we wanted to involve the Young Curators Club, we wanted somewhere that was easily accessed, and also we wanted a very benign and welcoming landowner, obviously, because we were going to bring a lot of people to this site over the 6 months of the project. Later on, I'll tell you about all the other depopulated settlements along this strath. So Strath Carnaig, the little blue line, one of the rivers that runs into Loch Fleet, the other is the River Fleet, which goes up past Rogat. And Dalnamain, the usual thing, you know, the desk-based assessment, looking at the maps, and slightly to my surprise, it appears on the Roy map. And there it is, Dalnamain, with Ushi and Easter and Wester Acher Duig, it says there. That's not how it's spelt these days, but it's definitely Dalnamain, with 2 potential clusters of settlement and lots of rig and furrow beside it. I then started looking for more maps because, you know, 1788, the Taradale map is just such a useful map. Are there any more maps available? And hey, literally this week, I got an email and Roland had already alerted me to the presence of the Sutherland estate maps on the NLS. And they emailed me. I'd already asked them about if they had any maps of the Torbal estate within the Sutherland estate maps. And you can see this. Let me see where my cursor is. Oops, sorry, I can't go back. Anyway, there was one little house. That's all that is visible. So by 1832, the settlement had disappeared. So between the Roy map and 1832, this settlement had been actually just eliminated. But again, first edition and second edition maps are of great use. So by the first edition in the 1870s, you've got Dalnamain, different spelling. Apparently there's about 20 different spellings of this name, which is quite interesting. But it has a shepherd's house. It has a byre, a wonderful extensive enclosure and sheepfank or sheepfold. And up here, another little enclosure called Innes Anno, possibly. My Gallic's not good. And I've looked extensively in the Gallic dictionaries online to find a translation for that, and I cannot find one. So any help on that will be gratefully received. By the time of the second edition, early 1900s, you've got Dalnamain, different spelling, Shepherd's House, Byre, Sheepfank, great big enclosure with a standing stone in it. So we know that this was a working sheep farm. So, and with changes on it. This is something that I emphasize to the children. You can't just rely on one map, you have to look at more than one. The History Links ladies found this wonderful Sutherland Estates rental from 1806 with all the settlements down this side and the tenants and the amount of money they pay. And Dalnamain appears. So in 1806, that says Lieutenant Hugh Sutherland was the main tenant of this patch of land, and he had on the land holding, there were another 9 tenants of much lower standing, paying just over £1, £2, whereas Hugh was paying £5.15 shillings. So where do we go from there? So we've got this site, Upper Strath, and I think there's 9 other settlements up this Strath, or there were in 1800. It belonged originally, or rather it was a tack originally to a strand of the Sutherland family, initially James Sutherland of Evelix and Dalnamain, and then his son James, followed by our nice fella here, Hugh Sutherland. Now, the point being here that he was Hugh Sutherland of Evelix and Dalnamain. As I live in Evelix, I was quite interested by that. But James, or possibly Hugh, but I think James, and possibly the middle James, the second James, the son of James, appears to have been somewhat profligate, because one of the more obscure little bits of archive in History Links Museum is a little bit about the Evelix estate, 1769, list of arrears. And it seems that Lady Evelix had a jointure and house unpaid on the 14th of December 1756, £28 for it. But the total of arrears amounted to £5,214.19. So somebody had lost or mislaid a large amount of money. Now this Lady Evelix, as I said, I think from this very scrappy document, and I'm holding it up because I couldn't manage to get it to reproduce on the I don't know if you can see, that's just an old-fashioned typewriter. Somebody had been very careless with their money, and Lady Evelix was kind of left somewhat in a lurch. But there were 21 tenants on the estate at that point. Clearly, with that level of debt, the tack had to be given up. And they were no longer the Sutherlands of Evelix. They became the Sutherlands of Dalnamain. Now, I freely admit that I don't understand all the ins and outs of what happened. And sadly, this typewritten piece of evidence in History Links, I think must have come from the Sutherland estate papers, but there's no reference, no details of where it's come from. So when I can get back down to the archives in Edinburgh, I will go hunting for this these pieces of paper and see if I can make more sense out of them when I see them in person. So Hugh Sutherland, his birth date estimated between, this is a bit random, this is internet research, 1733, his birth was between 1733 and 1793. So quite a wide range of birth dates. I think, nearer to the early, probably the first third of the 1700s. He married a Magdalene Sutherland, and he had 3 children, 2 sons and a daughter, and was living in 1819. So we've got no proper birth date, we've got no proper death date. This is, of course, the genealogy vagaries of the internet. So my suspicion is by 1806, Hugh was in a pretty poor state. Monetarily, he was now reduced to sort of being the main tenant of this area of land called Dalnamain. Probably still called himself Hugh Sutherland of Dalnamain. But what we do know is that by 1812, the whole of Dalnamain and a large area to the west was turned into what we now would call the Torble sheep farm. So, without James Bone, where would we be? And these photographs, these Jim Bone photographs, I am very grateful for Marion initially, and then Roland sending me a tremendous resource. So again, the map, we see Shepherd's House, Byre, Sheep Fank, very large later Fank. But of course, on this map, we can see the details, all the little enclosures, funny little wandering wall there, a very odd, this is very odd on the ground, enclosure. You can see the rig and furrow. And over here, I know that that is the longhouse that we focused on. Different angle, and again, you can see enclosures everywhere. But we know that we've got 10 tenants on this land, so we theoretically should have more than one longhouse. Merrill, generous as always, came and did one of her stunning walkovers and measured surveys. Here is the main focus of the longhouse project, a longhouse, with slightly to the north, 2 little buildings. Down here, and Jim Bone's photograph makes this a lot clearer, there's another house building. Over to the west, another building, collection of buildings, and this potentially is another house. I can't see why it isn't another house. There's a corn kiln here, corn kiln there, and over here under Roland on my screen is another corn kiln. Here, potentially 2 compartment house. So that's 1, 2, 3 possible houses. Corn kiln there, did I say yes? With the V's are tatty pits, and we've got a very large area of lack of buildings. And I think potentially, again, we shall never know, but under the Shepherd's House, under the Byre, which has some very odd bits of walling coming out of it just there, we may well have Taxman's house, another longhouse. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 houses. We'll come back to Innis Anor again in a minute or two, possibly another house up there. So we're getting a few houses, but there's no way really. The outshots to me say house, but is that a house or is that a double buyer? Who knows? We shan't know unless we dig them. So these are there's another building coming out here. I think there's another building coming out here, which is not visible on the ground at all, but it's obvious in the, or more obvious in the, there's another one up there. I spend hours and we'll be going out as soon as it dries up in Sutherland to see what I can see on the ground, because I only got these photographs really just over a week ago. So, a multi-period settlement, in fact. You may have noticed the standing stone. This is the standing stone. It is one of the poorest examples of a standing stone that I've seen in a while. Potentially, there's a cairn below it. There's a pile of stones. Whether it's a cairn, I don't know, but it's on Carn Moor as a standing stone and a cairn, Neolithic possibly. Don't know. I would reserve judgment on it. My husband is standing as a scale on a hut circle, and another picture of the hut circle. Unlike a few hut circles, it's on the national grid. But how they missed it, I'll never know. But it is a really nice example of a Sutherland hut circle. South-southeast facing entrance. Nice remains of a wall, possible little wall coming off the hut wall. A really nice example. There are over here and up the hill a bit, somewhere over here, there's a great collection of hut circles. There's more hut circles. There's chambered cairns up here. Over here in the woods, there's a little, a rather cute little, possibly Iron Age dune. Just sits there, worthy of a plain table. Not worthy of possibly being scheduled, but we'll see. Then up here, you can see the green of another of the settlements. Up here is Achaniel, one of the bigger depopulated settlements, probably about the same size as Dalnamain. And then over the top, you're beginning to get over into the Dornoch Strath, and there are even more settlements up there. Going this way, up the hill, you're over into Strath Fleet and to the Rogat settlements. So it's a very populated area in the past. 4 hut circles, Bronze Age, Iron Age, but also right through, potentially, literally right through multi-period. I haven't found anything, as far as I know, that can prove that between the Bronze Age, Iron Age hut circles and the pre-clearance settlement. So here's the sort of the last phase. Again, Shepherd's House, buyer now looking fairly dilapidated, and looking again over to Achaniel and to the Fank and everything in the front of the house. These photographs were taken by Peter Wilde, one of the members of History Links. So there's Dave and myself standing on the longhouse. I'm not standing on the longhouse. The longhouse is there. This is definitely a drone job. Here it is on Merrill's map, a slightly more distant picture of us. Down here, there's a little trickle of, it won't be a little trickle just now, but a trickle of water. Again, another view, you see it in its sort of, there's a slight arch to it, suggesting a direction of drainage. One of ancillary buildings sitting behind the longhouse. Here I am standing going, oh, look, the corn drying kiln with threshing barn, looking into the bowl of the corn kiln and looking at it from a different angle. Nicely set into the hill. Flue and possible second flue, but I think it's just a single flue to the corn kiln. And because this presentation was originally for people who know quite a lot less than most of my audience tonight, a picture of a corn kiln and its workings. Again, looking after over the lower ground, very clear rigs, very clear clearance. It's obviously grazed by sheep these days, and these are the rigs. And Jim Bone's photographs show very clearly how much of this lower ground was actually rigged. Here on this picture, this excerpt from Merrill's plan, you can see this really odd two semicircles. I suspect that under the clearance, because a lot of this is clearance, there's another hut circle, possibly a bigger one than the one with the power source. Some nice tatty pits sitting there, and here you can see they're actually sitting on rig. So we've got a continuity of use. Yeah, they were growing barley, oats, whatever on the rig, but when the tatties came in, were introduced around the 1790s, about possibly around that time, then we produced tatty pits. I think there's 8 in total. There's 5 here, but there's 3 more on the other side of the site. An example of possibly a head dike. It looks like a head dike, but it's quite insubstantial. I've seen more substantial head dikes that runs along the top of the best cultivated land, the most cultivated land. And then you're on to really, some of this looks like it's been scalped for turfs, for houses, or for roofs, or for whatever you wanted to use your turf or your field for. Or it's not a peat bank, definitely. There's the river down below us and the road over there. So we've done a quick sweep of this lot. We haven't looked at this particular settlement at all. I haven't got photographs of that, mainly because I can't get the camera high enough above the bracken. It is very heavily covered with bracken. The hut circle is here, and the standing stone is off to the right of the plan. So this little group up here, this is the right heading up the hill. There's the burn, this is the first edition, and you can see here there's a longhouse, and that is definitely a longhouse with at least one outshot. Although the first edition doesn't put it on, there's a building coming out here. There's a very nice corn kiln, which you'll see in a moment. Here, no, about here actually. Down here, there's another house, building or something. There's certainly a building. And down here, there are 3 buildings. And these 3 buildings are in some ways the most interesting, because the biggest one is quite sunk into the raised area it sits on above the river. And I wonder if that is one of the older buildings on the site. I don't know. Again, excavation would prove it. This footpath, which still you can follow, it's the obvious route up the hill. Very obvious route up the hill is on this side, followed by the head dike, if that's what it is. It runs off here, and there are a number of dikes crossing over there. Corn kiln up on the top there, that's the one I was talking about. Not quite as well preserved as the one beside the main longhouse down on the low ground, but it's still quite well preserved. It's quite a nice one. In the top there, we found this stone with an eye to cut mark rocks. I went, oh, well, that's not a cut mark. You can see the circle. Answer on a postcard, please. It's not a quernstone. It's not a big enough, well, it's a very little part of a quernstone, if that's what it is. It's beside the doorway. Is it a door slot, you know, for sitting the words have disappeared. You know what I mean. But that's sitting up there. I've got more photographs, so if somebody wants to do photogrammetry on it, let me know. I said there were more settlements along here. This is our Dalnamain here. Bray is here. And quite interestingly, historically, Bray was in the late 1700s a farm. It wasn't a tenancy, well, it was a tenancy, but it belonged to Colonel George Sutherland, I think a cousin of Hugh Sutherland. But George Sutherland, in his memoirs, talks about milking, having his cows up at Bray, and there was a lady, a housekeeper, who made all the dairy products from there. So it was technically, I would say, it was a shieling, but quite a complex shieling. George Sutherland lived over the hill to the south at Riacha, just inland from Dornoch. But you can see there's a Pictish tower, a very fine broch, which provided the stone for the very large thing there. And there's a whole row of circles along there. This, I've got photographs from Jim Bone, again, really interesting. I've been planning to go up that hill ever since I started going up to Dalnamain. I will get there before long. It's a very well preserved pre-clearance settlement, Strath. I think, and a small soapbox here is required, I think the potential for understanding agriculture pre-clearance in Sutherland, if you're going to find it out, this is one of the places you could try to understand it, to understand how one of these settlements actually worked, and possibly find out how far they date back. Certainly pre-General Roy, so pre-1747, 8, whatever, whenever he came into Sutherland. So there's a lot of potential. We've got a broch, we've got an Iron Age dune, we've got Bronze Age hut circles, and up at Achonneil, we've got keyhole hut circles. And I don't know many of them. I know they exist, but I know there's one up there. Mm-hmm. So, thank you very much for listening. There's our longhouse. And maybe after COVID, we'll have another little project and we'll put a slot trench across that and understand it. And look at all that rig. Thank you very much.